Hello friends and fellow world builders. My name is AJ Winters and welcome back to World Builder. Today we're turning our focus southward to the region of Crestfell. All we know so far is that they are the main wine region of Aelwyn, with a queen and a court full of lords and ladies that own and maintain the lands. So let's dig a little deeper. What does the region look like? Who do they trade with? But most importantly, what does the culture look like in a region that's basically bathing in wine? Let's find out. So firstly, let's start with what I imagine Crestfell to look like. I imagined cold weather and fogs coming in from the south. And because they're at the very bottom of Aelwyn, perhaps the coldest of seas, the Fellian Sea, affects their weather, making them have heavy rainfall and maybe even a lot of cold winds. This tells me two things. Firstly, because of the colder temperatures and the rainfall, perhaps that is why the vineyards flourish. And secondly, there could be a whole culture that could have stemmed from sea travel, larger vessels wading out into the harsh, cold oceans. Maybe we're looking at porting towns along the coast, where they prepare hot beverages to serve on the cold sands to warm the sailors, who serve and catch rare and large fish. But these coastal towns definitely aren't the vacation type. The beaches are practically frozen, meaning the further you travel up north to Natreva, the warmer the lands would get. However, I do imagine that there's still frequent or heavy rainfall, which is why I picture this Britain medieval meets Viking style kind of culture. And due to the weather, I would assume that the fashion would be high collars, long sleeves, and layers, maybe even furs and pelts during their colder seasons. Which kind of adds to my perception of the prudish nature in Crestfell. Maybe wearing clothes that show too much skin is a little scandalous, and not just because it's unwise in the colder weather. I also imagine that because we decided upon lords and ladies in the royal court of Queen Felicia the Bold, that perhaps the land is divided up into the lands of these lords and ladies. Meaning that every hour or so you might find yourself in a new small town with their own wine or alcohol speciality, probably named after the house who owns the land. Frederick's Ale, Lady Grey Wine, that kind of thing. And in between these villages or settlements are vineyards, orchards, or mountains, because no land in Crestfell is left untouched. Which is kind of sad, but it does make sense in one of the oldest and most greedy regions of Aelwyn. I also like playing around with the idea of using architecture designs from the Middle Ages for these villages. Timber framing, clay walls, thatched roofing, or maybe even stone or tiling for the more wealthy. Oh, and I want to change up how they use windows. I was thinking maybe they could collect sea glass from the coasts. It's always available and it's always being produced or collected. But it would mean that unless you had significant coin, you wouldn't have clear windows, more coloured or even mosaic styles perhaps, which could even be the fashion in the less wealthier parts of town. And maybe it's the complete opposite for roofing. If you're not wealthy, you can't afford the dyes for the clay of your tiles. Therefore, you would see reds, greens, and even blue roofs the further into town you get, or the higher up the mountains you go. Because Crestfell is religious, which we know because they invaded the Trilands in the name of the gods, maybe their emblem is sun-related, something about the gods shining down on them. Therefore, the wealthy like to be closer to the sun. Maybe they build their houses or castles taller or even on higher ground, which could also be protection or self-defense. And speaking of self-defense, I think that Crestfell would need to protect their lands and vineyards at all costs, as that is where their wealth comes from. Which in turn makes me think that perhaps they conscript their young people to the Crestfellian Guard, or even the armies of Crestfell to protect the land, the vineyards, and the wealthy. And because of this system, I think that there's a large discrepancy and gap between the wealthy and the workers in Crestfell. If you're not from wealth, it would be incredibly hard to work your way up the proverbial ladder in Crestfell. You would work the fields of whichever lord or lady's land you lived on. You'd have as many children as you could in order to work the fields and earn as much profit until they became of conscription age, and then you'd lose half your profit based on the lack of hands. And you could never truly own your own land because it is divided up by your queen, whom you love. You could start a trade, however, and that could work, Only it might not work out if you don't have enough resources or if it's not approved by the lord or lady that runs your land. Which leads me to this. Milky Lens posed an interesting question when we discussed this with our Discord community. They asked, why the f would people stay in Crestfell then? Well, I think the answer is threefold. 1, Crestfell has a lot of national pride and a love for their queen. I guess raised in awe of the wealthy. 2, they are highly religious, and moving to a different region might mean losing their connection to their beliefs or even their community. And 3, great healthcare. This started as a joke, but it makes sense. Crestfell needs their vineyards to thrive in order to make profit off their goods, i.e. the wine. So why would they let their workers be sick or injured? That would just hurt business. So I think maybe Crestfell also specializes in a variety of health potions and remedies. Maybe even medical facilities and spas? Keeping their citizens healthy and youthful would be important to them, so that they can continue making them work 12-hour days. Keeping in mind that there is 15 hours of daylight in Aelwyn. But you get my point. Maybe they have a lot of healers too. And if this is a religious region, then maybe they are the equivalent of a cleric, if we're talking D&D. But I want to call them something different. Nursing and religion have come hand in hand in history, so perhaps Crestfell has houses or convents dedicated to the gods that also teach healing practices. Maybe even a monastery in each town or village dedicated to a place of worship, libraries, infirmaries, and maybe even a school all combined into one. Yeah, I like that. Maybe that's even a reason people travel to Crestfell, to train as a healing practitioner. And speaking of traveling to Crestfell, I think there would be a few reasons you would. Firstly, Crestfell's trade agreements state that the buyer must pick up their own produce, as Crestfell is no longer responsible for the wines or goods as soon as they leave the region. Crestfell have dedicated pickup zones on the edges of their borders so that people can pick up the produce easily, either on the coast or on the other side of the cresting mountains, which is actually how Crestfell got its name, cresting over the mountains to meet the Fellion Sea. Secondly, for the wealthy at least, Crestfell would make an excellent place for a holiday home or a holiday destination, especially in the vineyard season. Wines aplenty, glorious lands, maybe even sporting? Serum 76 suggested Vorkin races, which I absolutely love and does make sense for Crestfell, especially since I think the wealthy would get incredibly bored with their passive income and turn to things like racing, gambling, galas, and grand competitions. Maybe even some illegal fighting rings? And thirdly, I think Crestfell has the only direct and easiest route to the Shattered Isles. The Fire Islands might have a tense relationship with their sea-bound neighbours, but it's in Crestfell's best interest to keep these pirates happy and well-liquored. And speaking of trading liquor and making deals, I think that perhaps there is a porting town in the old Venenfell lands, renamed Queensport, where a tense but balanced trading triangle has been formed.
The Shattered Isle brings in barrels of aquatic fruit. The Fire Islands bring in skyseed, and Crestfell provides the liquor. Picture it, the rowdy and unsettling culture in this porting town, surrounded by old ruins of Venenfell, full of pirates, scavengers, the hardest of Traven born for sea travel, and the Crestfellian salesmen and ale-makers.
Perhaps there is also some sort of fiery aquatic cider that is only found in Queensport because of this. Something they give to the newcomers just to watch their faces. Sounds like a fun place for a plotline. Note that for later. And speaking of liquor, I want to dabble into some of the exports from Crestfell, dealing with the most exquisite and fine selections to even the most common drinks that they trade across all of Aelwyn. I think Crestfell take any of their produce and try and turn it into alcohol, from grain into ale to vegetables into harder liquor, and even their premium vineyards offering all different types of grapes into subsequent wines. Maybe they even make ice wine in the coldest parts. Crestfell can get quite icy in the winter season, so that makes sense. And also Belagur suggested a shadow wine sold in the undergrounds, which is infused with other substances. And I love that. And because all of our major cities in Aelwyn are built or renovated in circular designs for teleportation or safety, perhaps the best vineyards in Crestfell are actually built and grown in the center of the city of Yendine, the capital city where the Queen lives. And then the buildings are surrounding it, protecting it from any invasion or harm to the vineyards. And lastly, I had an idea. I think that the citizens of Crestfell are mostly Daemon and Avanthame. Maybe there was someone who moved to Crestfell because of the rich soil, and they were Avanthame born and ended up planting fields of Avanthame. And maybe because the temperatures are cooler, they're known as winter Avanthame and grow in colorings that are more cool with flowers native to that area. Maybe they're of a younger lineage to the Avanthame we know from Kylandry, and the person who moved to Crestfell did so because of the healing practices, maybe even specializing in growing some sort of healing plant? Maybe the Queen of Old accepted them because of their symmetry and beauty, and now there's even an Avanthame seat on the royal court in Crestfell, meaning that Avanthame own their own lands. They have their own section in Crestfell. Alright, I think I'm going to leave it there for today. If you liked this episode, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel so that you get notified when new videos come out. If you want to stay up to date with everything that we're doing behind the scenes here at Winter's Tales, then you can follow us on all of the socials. I promise you, we're everywhere. Or maybe you would like a more personalized behind the scenes view with downloadable PDFs of anything we create on this channel. Then maybe you'd like to hang out in our Patreon. Or if you just want to join the community and get access to weekly world building prompts, then you can join us on the Discord. Lastly, we have a weekly world building stream on Twitch every Tuesday at 8 PM AWST on twitch.tv/winterstales. Oh, and we've also recently teamed up with World Anvil. We are super excited about this, but it means that all of our content is going to be moving onto their platform, and you guys get access to a link that's down below in the description too. So sign up and come world build with us. Next week, we're going to be diving into moon cycles and seasons and subsequent holidays and festivals too. I am so excited. But until then, I'll see you next week.